Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. Oh, my gosh. You know this. I'm going to take a minute and talk to you about things in my life that have come together. You know this. We talk about it. I spend a lot of time thinking about our government and the politics in this country, particularly with regard to Washington and these questions of democracy. But I live in Chicago. I mean, I have been very involved in this city my whole life as a public school teacher, as an alderman. I ran the public housing here. I have networks all over the city, and I have watched what we have done in the face of this onslaught that the president has brought to our city. Look, and I've thought about it. Washington is a dead end. It's a dead end right now. Donald Trump and the Republicans would destroy everything to maintain power. But this is America, and Chicago is the most American city. We rise to the challenge and are reborn in the forge of adversity. Look, Republicans failed to pass a budget this fiscal year. That's why the government shut down, not for any other reason. It shut down because Republicans failed to pass a budget. And they want Democrats now to bail them out by supporting a continuing resolution. That sounds like normal politics, right? But it isn't, because under Donald Trump, Washington has become, as I say, this dead end. Let me explain. Republicans say funding levels will remain the same. That's what a continuing resolution promises. But in fact, extending the old budget means letting health care subsidies expire. And experts agree that the impact will be swift and severe. The Republican budget raises health insurance premiums more than 75%, for 24 million of us. Wow. And that's not all. Republicans say Democrats can trust that the budget will be honored by the administration. After all, we were voting for a budget, right? Yet when Democrats suggested language that would require the administration to use the funds as budgeted, the GOP refused. Okay, fool me once, shame on me, right? The last time Democrats agreed to support a continuing resolution to keep the government open, the Republicans went ahead and rescinded the spending anyway. You can't make a deal with bad partners. And that's not all. I mean, Republicans want to pretend that passing the budget allows government to function as usual. It does not. It does not. The Trump administration has fully politicized the federal government. It does not function as usual. So spending money on things like civil rights now means spending money to deny civil rights. Spending money on the Justice Department now means spending money to prosecute those on Donald Trump's enemies list. And spending money on defense, well, that now means spending money to send troops to American cities. Instead of forcing a shutdown, Republicans could do their job and pass a budget. But Speaker Johnson keeps extending the House vacation. The House vacation. That's right. While the government is shut down, courtesy of Mike Johnson, the House of Representatives is on paid vacation. That's what Democrats want. And why? Why would he do that? Well, because when they come out of vacation, they have to swear in a Democrat who won a House seat last month, and they still haven't sworn her in. And when she is sworn in, there will be enough signatures on a petition to require a vote on whether to release the Epstein files. Speaker Johnson would rather keep the House from opening during this crisis than to permit that vote. Unlike the House, the Senate is in session, but wow. Look, they're working on a budget. This week they passed their version of the Defense Authorization Act. The final bill was amended, get this, to repeal the authority to use military force in Iraq. Wow. But the Republican senators voted down measures to limit the use of American troops in American cities or to require them to wear ID when deployed domestically. I mean, because of Republican senators, the residents of Basra in Iraq are now safer from unwanted U.S. military intervention than the residents of Chicago. Out in America, not in Washington, out in America, people are fed up. We see an out-of-control president who is more concerned with building a gilded ballroom in the White House than with the lives of Americans. Yeah, the guys building his ballroom, they're not affected by the shutdown. This week, Trump threw a fit. He demanded the Nobel Peace Prize. And when he didn't get it, he caused the stock market crash by canceling a summit with President Xi and imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese imports. What a baby. I mean, tariffs already caused China to boycott American soybeans, bankrupting American farmers. What did Trump do? What did he do? He bails out Argentina so they can sell soybeans to, you guess it, China. Americans are fed up with the unprecedented and heavy-handed propaganda. I mean, we just know better, right? No, we don't believe their lies. This week, Kristi Noem cut a new video that's now playing at airport security lines across the country. In it, she blames Democrats for delays caused by the shutdown. Seriously? Seriously? And you know what? Across the country, Americans are fed up with the lawlessness. That video that Kristi Noem cut is a clear violation of the Hatch Act, which prohibits using federal property, spending federal, taxpayer money on politics. But Pam Bondi, the nation's highest law enforcement official, believes that if the president wants it, it can't be illegal. Imagine that in America. She testified before Congress that there's no enemy list, but Trump posted an enemy list on Truth Social, and she's going down the list and indicting folks on it. Americans are fed up. And you know what? Across the country, we're planning to attend No Kings rallies on October 18th. Literally, thousands of these rallies are planned in big cities, in small farming towns, in blue states, in red ones, in big states, in little ones, across America. It looks to be, if the initial organizing reports are correct, the single largest protest in American history. But on cue, Speaker Johnson came off his vacation and called it a Hate America rally. He said it was the pro-Hamas wing, the Antifa people. Please, aren't we exhausted by all of this? I understand there's a sound problem. I apologize. Don't know what to do about that. We'll try and fix it in a minute. So let me just cut to the point here. Because Americans are fed up in places like Chicago, where there is no Antifa. And you know what? The president's thugs are the real domestic terrorist organization. Overarmed and undertrained, ICE and the Customs and Border Patrol continue to harass journalists, treat peaceful protesters as enemy combatants, and detain citizens without cause. This is the dead end on offer by the ruling party in Washington. But this is America, and you can see the new beginning already. This rebirth begins right here in Chicago, ground zero in Trump's assault on the rule of law. Chicagoans have come out to protect one another. We show up at school drop-offs and pickups to protect children. By the way, adults without children or whose own children are now adults, we show up. We look out for our neighbors. We protest. We pray. We bear witness. Chicagoans are showing the country what they no longer see in Washington: common decency, community, commitment to the rule of law and to each other. And most importantly, right here in the midst of an armed effort to coerce a great American city, Chicagoans are showing the whole world that most American of traits: the determination to be free. And you know what? Because of that, we're going to win. Now I'm going to take a break. When we come back, I have actually a great show. Clara Jeffrey's my first guest.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Clara Jeffrey is the award-winning editor-in-chief of the fabulous Mother Jones. As you all know, I am a big fan of Mother Jones. It's essential journalism always, and that makes it stand out even more in our era when so many formerly great news organizations have faltered. Clara, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin.
Hey, I want to spend time talking about the piece you wrote on calling for soft secession. But before we get there, could we take a little bit of time to talk about journalism in this exceptional time?
Sure. It's a pretty depressing topic.
Well, yeah, it is, isn't it? But I had a great conversation, I want to say 2 weeks ago, with one of yours, Kara Butler. And I just can't imagine the conversations you must have with your team about what stories to pursue, what depth to pursue them, because honestly, the variety and the careful attention to ideas that, month after month shows up in Mother Jones leaves the impression that you have a huge news staff.
I mean, it's not that huge. We have about 77 journalists, which is pretty big, but it's and we've grown over the years, so that's nice and that's great. But I think it's also we seem big because so many things have been cut back so terribly, or are being watered down or redirected away from investigative journalism, maybe towards a sort of MAGA-friendly, opinion-y kind of space. And so, it's I think we're doing great work, but it's also easier to stand out when there's less work being done overall, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I ran the Chicago Sun-Times earlier in my life as its CEO, and I'm deeply familiar with the crushing burden on local news and familiar with what's happened to investigative reporting as well. They're both expensive and the markets are in an odd place, but people need this stuff. I think there's the chaos in the news business is also, I think, now an opportunity. I mean, if people can't count on the Washington Post or 60 Minutes anymore, but like young Americans never got into that habit and never did anyway, the transformation of news consumption, I don't know, maybe brutal for old journalism, but it's an opportunity for you, I think.
It's an opportunity in a lot of ways, and we are certainly doing a lot of experimentation. We've had a magazine since the beginning and an active daily site for, in a big way for more than a decade. Now we have radio shows, podcasts, and we do a lot of short video, and partially that's to meet audiences wherever they are and however they like to get their news and information. So I think that there is a lot of people are hungry for information. They're not always given great information, and they often only want information that confirms their own biases. So that's a sort of, I think, general information space challenge that we all face as Americans. Yep. But it is true that at the same time there is a lot of opportunity for things to make their mark. I think the financial problem that you're speaking to is that so much of journalism was underwritten, by advertising for so long. And the problem with the networks that we're seeing is like the news part of these giant corporations is not profitable. So there's sort of a mixed feeling of like, why should I be bothered with this pesky thing that isn't making me money? When I have Hollywood studios to take care of and, entertainment-based products. So, and so I've long believed, even before this, like most recent crisis of journalism, that serious journalism was always going to be a matter of some combination of reader support and philanthropy. And, essentially nonprofit news was going to be what kind of survived this, because advertising no longer pays enough for news. Yep. To be missed. And that's what we're seeing. And, I think individual readers are stepping. I think Americans still don't really understand the sort of marketplace issues broadly, and they haven't been trained to sort of pay for journalism the way folks in other countries have, with higher subscription prices, or maybe there's state-sponsored media that's good and well endowed, or maybe it's just a storied brand that has gotten a loyal following over many years. But I think that's really we need to sort of fortify the ways in which people pay for journalism to get it out of the hands of corporations, because it's not in their financial interest. And if you run a corporation, that's ultimately what you care about.
Yep. We've certainly seen that. You helmed a merger between Mother Jones and Reveal. And I think there was recently a reorganization of leadership in the newsroom to meet the moment. Like, how are you thinking about, organizing to get the, you're not an opinion. You're not an opinion. But you're like this show I'm not a journalist. I'm married to one. I know the difference. But you guys do real journalism, real investigative journalism, and you sort of organize to meet the moment. What's the thinking about how you do this and grow?
Well, I mean, what we're trying to do is essentially, we do a lot. We have a lot of different kinds of journalism done in our shop, both in format and kind of length and all that. But with our sort of big investigations, whether it's, sort of a one-off or an area that we cover, emphatically over time, what we're now trying to do is to make sure it's not just like a one and done situation that we try and, make use of the whole animal, if you will. Like, we'll have magazine pieces and big web features, but also that goes into long-form radio documentary, even into long-form film documentary. We had a couple big documentary films come out in the last couple of years, one of which won an Emmy, the other which is on Netflix. Like, so, and so, and then also the radio shows that we do are, of course, both podcasts as well. So try and understand that, some people are just going to watch a short video. And if you can get them to watch that short video and maybe they get their news that way, great. And if they sort of scale up and get interested and read a long story or go listen to a podcast, investigative interview, that's all great. We have to just kind of meet people where they are and get them intrigued by, what we're reporting on.
And you have a mission focus in what you're reporting on. I mean, I clicked on the food tab on your website, Clara, and almost invariably when I do that on other news sites, I get restaurant reviews, I get recipes, I get, sort of consumer friendly information about food. But you guys are wired differently. I mean, the stories included a crash course in Trump's betrayal of American soy farmers and stories about how you feed the planet and ourselves without destroying both. I just love that you guys know what you're about and your reporting doesn't lose its focus.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think, our mission is, I don't have this exact wording in front of me, but it's to produce revelatory journalism that, seeks to make a better world, basically. And so we've long been very interested in sort of food system politics. I think right now with the tariffs, the soybean piece that you mentioned, and we have a great short video about that, is, how crazy is it that by raising the tariffs on many things, but including agricultural products, that caused the Chinese to say, like, okay, we're not going to buy soybeans from American farmers anymore. We'll buy them from Argentina. And so now Trump is both bailing out a sort of radical libertarian president of Argentina who crashed his government with a crazy scheme, crashed his economy with a crazy scheme, to the tune of $20 billion. Someone who also is very close with Scott Bessent and his hedge fund friends. And we're going to probably give some kind of bailout to our farmers. But so we're paying twice
right.
to prop up something that isn't even the market that the farmers, want to be in. This won't make them whole. It'll help, but it won't make them whole, and it won't set up their businesses for future success. So, I think we've interviewed a lot of people in that world, including farmers who, voted for Trump. This is not what they want, and it wasn't what they expected. And meanwhile, we're, good for the people of Argentina, I suppose, that we're helping to bail them out, but we're doing it to prop up a friend of Scott Bessett's buddies and a guy who crashed his economy by, putting it all on the, kind of over-indexing on crypto and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, well, listen, everybody, just from what you've heard, if you want to be informed about the world, you have to read Mother Jones. If you're concerned that the rest of America doesn't know what's going on, and that's part of the problem that we're facing, then you have to fund Mother Jones. So buy a subscription, you can contribute to it, because this is the kind of journalism you guys are always asking about. How are people in America going to know what's going on? You really got to do it. All right, Clara, thank you for that sort of sideline into journalism. Let's talk about your piece, which was really interesting, and I had some thoughts about it that I want to hear about. So you wrote this piece that about maybe it's time for soft secession. First, what does that mean? And then let's get into some of the details.
Yeah, soft secession is sort of a term. Another more academic-y term is uncooperative federalism. And it's basically what I'm arguing and pointing out, and that other people are arguing, is that the sort of MO of the Trump administration is to pick off things one by one, pick off a state, pick off a city, pick off a program. And there's been a real collective action problem, be it on the behalf of media companies or corporate law firms or universities or whatever. Everyone hopes they can just sort of maybe pay them off or let this blow over. And soft secession is really saying, no, we have to, the states that want to protect immigrants, to protect science, to protect, the sort of values that they hold, to protect clean energy and so forth, need to sort of band together to create both protective apparatus to help them maintain what they want to do, but also, go on the offensive to, make the stakes of what's happening really clear. And I think there's a lot of different ways that this could be done, but at its base, and there are a lot of ways that this is already happening. So, for example, the vaccine compact that Washington, Oregon, California, and then Hawaii joined in. And there's another one, kind of in the New England cluster to create their own vaccine standards and protocols. There's pandemic and other public health emergency funding and planning that's kind of going along the lines. The attorneys general of blue states, even before Trump was elected, had started to really coordinate and organize what will we do, what will we face, and what will we do if he comes into office. And that has helped. They hit the ground running on several different fronts, and you sort of see some of the lawsuits that they've initiated have helped kind of slow the advance of what Trump's trying to do in a number of places. So it's both kind of describe, and I will say that your governor JB Pritzker and our governor Gavin Newsom both basically said, hey, Governors Association, which is this 100-plus-year-old, kind of confederation of governors. If some of your members are going to send troops into our state over the the objections of us, the executives of those states and the controllers, the commandants of our own National Guard, then we're going to leave this association. Like, let's not pretend that we're all kind of acting in a united way. If you're basically helping to invade our state,
it had an impact.
So once he sort of, and it did have an impact. I believe he's from Oklahoma. I can't remember his name.
He is from Oklahoma, governor of Oklahoma.
Yep, the governor of Oklahoma. Basically was like, our association does not, back these efforts.
And by the way, for those of you who are listening, I know you probably know this. The governor of Oklahoma is not a Democrat.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So this is like the kind of united front that blue cities and states can present. That I think makes the stakes clear of what's happening to the rest of the American public. I mean, this is why Gavin Newsom kicked off our redistricting effort as a sort of protection against what Texas was doing at the, pretty much over the desires of the GOP leaders in Texas, by the way, that Trump wanted it, so they did it. And so California is pushing back, and other states are, examining their own situations. But we should be doing this in a more of a united front. And I think what we see right now, it's pretty clear both Gavin Newsom and Lee Pritzker, are eyeing a presidential run. And so they're kind of twinning each other. But I think even more cooperation could be put forth, both in terms of policy and just in terms of rhetoric. So they got to go Avengers style on this and team up.
I mean, so they're governing things we could do. You point out in your piece that, California, Illinois, New York, they also have enormous other kinds of resources: agriculture, power, cultural power, technical. The tech industries are all in their homes, and if they could enlist the support of these people in their own states to help, could put enormous pressure. We also talked about not having pension fund investments in red states. And I mean, I'm thinking about the California Teachers Retirement Pension Fund, CalPERS, I think is the biggest pension fund in the country. I mean, it's the enormous economic power the blue states wield it could be a huge weapon in this fight.
That's right. I mean, California alone is the world's fourth biggest economy. We're the fifth biggest agricultural producer in the world. We have Silicon Valley and Hollywood, just a ton of natural resources, and we're enormous. But states, including Illinois and New York, and even smaller states have a lot of economic and cultural clout. And so it's really, how can that be leveraged? And one of the things I was trying to do is there's what authoritarians try and do is wear you down and exhaust you and depress you until you feel that it's all inevitable. And what can any one person do? What can any one state do? What can any one city do? And the answer through that is you have to team up with all of those other things to take the actions that you can. And one of which is just showing the American public what the hell is going on, which I think, the atrocities that are happening in Chicago, I don't pretend that all of America has woken up to that or has seen stuff that is not filtered through, Fox News or more inflammatory bubbles. But, that said, there have been dramatic kind of moves in the polls. This is not popular. Joe Rogan spoke out against it yet again. And the Trump, there's some portion of his base that will ride or die with him no matter what, probably. I mean, honestly, literally no matter what. But that's not everybody, and that's not how he won. And that's just in the realm of people who voted.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also, way too many Americans who can vote who do not. And so it's waking folks like that up too. This is about ever increasing inflation and energy costs. We're directing our utility, which is utilities and our grid, which is already in real trouble, to AI data centers, and Americans' electricity prices have already gone through the roof a lot, but they're really going to go through the roof in the next few years because we just don't have enough infrastructure. And who's going to get first dibs on that electricity?
Yep.
Trump's crypto billionaire friends, or you. And so that's
we know the answer to that because they did it with
Yep.
internet bandwidth. They said you pay more, you get more. Yeah. So I read this piece and I had two thoughts I want to ask you about. One, it feels like, you used two terms to describe it in the beginning, soft secession and non-cooperation. It feels like Cold War to me. What you're doing is saying we in America are in a Cold War. Hopefully not a hot war, but we're in a Cold War across red and blue states, and we had better act like it. And I thought about that, and then I thought, okay, but the red states have been in that Cold War for a while and do think like it. I mean, I think about Texas, and they, when Joe Biden was president, they set their National Guard up on the river and said the federal government can't come near the river, the Rio Grande. And they bust tens of thousands of migrants, despite the fact that the government gives Texas money to deal with the migration issues at the border. They bust them up to Chicago and other cities. They have been engaged in exactly the things you're talking about for a long time. And we've pretended, oh, no, we're one country and we all should just get along.
Yeah, I think that's right. And of course, again, we are talking about elected leaders that are beholden to, either because they really do thrill to the policies of Trump, or they're just scared. They're literally physically afraid of what happens if they stand up to him, and they're afraid for re-election. The latter part, I don't understand at all. How can you betray your country so enormously? Just go get another job. All these people will find one. But so then it comes down to just this sort of collective belief system that they're all in, and that's sort of propped up by right-wing media, and they never really see much outside of that. I mean, I think Trump is literally being shown, either old or AI-generated videos by Stephen Miller and whomever else to keep him at a fever pitch, So that's it. There's a whole element to this. Like, who's really running the country right now is Americans.
Claire, I hear that from people, and I want to say I have no patience with it, because if Donald Trump were gone, all these people we asking about are they running the country would be gone too. So let's just find a way to get rid of Donald Trump, and these other people go away.
Yeah. I think that's true, but that said, he is the battleship that they are steering.
I agree with you, but he's the battleship that has to be sunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the right, so the rhetoric that is on Fox News, the rhetoric on the right for decades has been that the left in America is destroying the country. The left in America is evil. The left in America is grooming children in pizza parlors. The left in America will destroy your family. And so politicians on the left have treated us like the enemy. So they have been in this Cold War, Texas in particular leading it, but not alone, this hostility towards the rest of the country. And I think what your piece is saying is, okay, fellas, we recognize that you're treating us this way. And you know what? We've turned the other cheek. We've turned the other cheek. We've turned the other cheek. But and again, this is not with guns, but Lincoln said one side would make war and the other side, well, would accept it. And what you're saying is it's time to accept it and fight back.
Yeah, what I'm saying is it's time to recognize the power that we have to unite collectively in that power and to push back using all the economic, cultural, legal maneuvers that we can. And I think it's also just that a lot of Americans, and I hear this from my own friends, are like, everything is so terrible. I just can't. I got to unplug. I got to get away from the news. And I mean, I'm very, very jealous of that ability. But I get it. But that said, I don't think we cannot have a clear eye about what is happening. They're sending troops and mass battalions of highly weaponized federal agents to cities to try and provoke something that they can catch on camera to feed their right-wing media beast and to have a pretext to crack down even further, go even harder, do even worse things. And
yeah, I mean, I live in one of those cities. And what they've done here is so awful. I mean, you've seen the stories, rappelling from a Black Hawk helicopter into an apartment building, taking everybody in the apartment building out in the middle of the night, zip-tied, separating children from their parents, taking people out who were sleeping naked and taking them out naked into the streets. For what? Saying because they think there's a Tren de Agua person in this apartment building, which, of course, there's no proof of. They had no warrants to do it. They actually wrote the warrants when they were there. Or shooting a priest with pellet guns because he was praying near their facility, here.
They're throwing congressional candidates on the ground.
They're driving down neighborhood streets in Chicago and releasing tear gas canisters and driving away. This is just terrorizing a city. And it's confusing, right? Because Chicago's an enormous city, and this activity, even with the federal presence, isn't happening in most of the city. Most of the city's beautiful. The weather has been shockingly great. People have been out in the parks. They've been walking along the river. They've been going out to eat, dining on the street. And I think to myself, wow, Paris in 1942 was still a beautiful city. It's very hard for people to get their head around this coercive, autocratic violence can be happening in a place that is also largely calm and business as usual. And that is a metaphor for the whole country and the very kind of thing you want us to wake up from.
Yeah, and I think that that's true. And while I totally, people should go for a nice walk and, have dinner with their friends and all of that. I don't want to say we should just be living in a total sense of terror and drudgery. But that said, I think we basically need to realize how quickly these changes are happening.
Yes.
It took Viktor Orban many years to get to some of the things that Trump has already accomplished, including a pretty dramatic takeover of mainstream media. We are only 9 months into this, and so much has been done already. And I think one of the things that I just kind of want to say to people is, yes, everybody needs to plan for the midterms and organize for the midterms and do all of that. But the midterms and the markets are not going to save us. We can't await them. It could be that this AI stuff holds up the actual stock market, but we know ordinary people are not getting the benefits of most of that. That's, that's.
And when healthcare cuts happen, it's going to be brutal.
No, and I think, there's been a lot of it. There's been an endless discussion about whether the Democrats should have gone bigger with their demands or, not. But I do think that this moment has really, and thank you, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think that this moment has really started to get people to be like, oh, wait, my healthcare costs are going to double in the next few months. Even if you're not on the ACA or you're not being cut from Medicare, the effect is pushed through the entire system.
Yeah.
Because when those costs are borne by whatever ends up bearing them, it ends up on the balance sheets of every American household, every American company. I mean, I'll tell you, like last year, Mother Jones and the Center for Investigative Reporting had a 17% increase in our healthcare costs, and we have very generous benefits for people. This year, we're projecting a 20% increase.
It's least unsustainable.
12%. It's unsustainable. And it's this weird situation where the failure of the American healthcare system is, of course, being pushed on to individual households, but it's also being pushed into like every business where the businesses end up being the bad guys for a system they don't really control. They have to administer all this crazy paperwork.
I don't like it.
It's nobody likes it. Doctors don't like it. No. Hospitals don't like it. Like, who likes this?
There's some insurance companies that are perfectly happy.
I guess. Some insurance companies, I guess. But it's an unsustainable system.
Well, I want to go back. You said, this has happened so very quickly, so much faster than Orban's efforts in Hungary. And I want to ask about that because I think maybe that's not how I see it. I think we are just waking up to, and Hillary was right when she said there's a vast right-wing conspiracy. I think, you have a Powell memo in 1972 that creates all these groups like the Heritage Foundation. And they've been working diligently for a long time. John Roberts, this is his 20th year on the court, and undoing the Voting Rights Act is what he's worked at tirelessly on the court, and he's almost succeeded, putting all that dark money into politics with Citizens United. This predates Trump. I mean, Trump couldn't have happened if this attack on our democracy hadn't been going on longer than I think we're ready to realize.
I think that's right. The right wing has always been very organized and disciplined about the things that it wants to accomplish. Trump is anything but organized and disciplined, but he came along and activated people's anger and rage and emotion, and that kind of combined with the Rest Vote, Project 2020, Heritage Foundation people who are recognize the moment for what it is, that they can gain a lot of yardage for what they want, and what they want is pretty horrifying to most Americans. Not just lefties.
Everybody.
People do not actually want a lot of what they're selling, and that's what you see now. They're like, "Well, I really just thought he would go after, the gang members." I mean, he was very clear that it was going to be beyond that in certain settings. But if you're not someone who, has to slog through a Trump speech or two a day, you're maybe don't pick up on that, or you're maybe
he said, I don't know who Project 2025 is. Never heard of them. Maybe there's some good ideas. I don't know if I like them. And then he went ahead and has implemented all of them.
Right. And I think that two-step that he does. Oh, I don't know. You see Mike Johnson doing that now about Trump. Oh, I don't know. I didn't see that press conference. I didn't hear about that Pete Hegseth speech. It's like, well, what who's doing your job then? If you're not aware of the biggest news events of the day, so there's just this sort of we can just blatantly lie. And, I think parts of the media did a real disservice of sort of oh, well, we don't know that. He says he's not going to do Project 2025. It's well, this was his head of the Office of Management and Budget. Who is writing this, who, with all these other people who worked in or for Trump during the first term, these are the people who are coming back. So it's pretty obvious. You don't need to have a memo, or in this day and age, it would be a stray DM or a leaked signal chat or whatever to see what's before your own eyes. And I think that kind of the kind of somewhat old-fashioned rules that still, I think, afflict parts of journalism about, like, just tell people what is actually happening, not what politicians say is happening.
That is so important. I mean,
let us down.
There are a couple things that threw me during the campaign. And one was all this reporting that Donald Trump's going to Detroit to meet with union members, right? Like, he had a week of news about that, which he never was going to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, why report on what he says when you know what he says is not true? And then you had the New York Times say, seriously compare Kamala Harris's housing policy with Donald Trump's. And Donald Trump's housing policy was deport everybody because that'll lower the demand for housing. That's not a housing policy. That's just insane. And it got reported as if it was not insane. I didn't even know how to think about that.
Well, also, they've deported a lot of people. Does anybody housing prices gone down? No, because we don't have inventory. We haven't built nearly enough in the past decade, and we need to build denser housing on transit corridors in particular, but we need to build housing of all kinds. And, and there's some real left denialism on that, too. You'll find a lot of lefties who are like, well, if we just something about landlords was better, there's actually enough housing. And it's like, no, there's some bad landlords, to be sure, but we just need more housing.
We need more housing, and we have a problem on the left with capitalism, and there are lots of good critiques of modern capitalism, but developers aren't going to build housing for free, and we have to find a way to live with that. So. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, you can't just, I think there's a big mistake. This is one of my areas of obsession. There's a big mistake when people are like, listen, if we just had the socialist style housing of Vienna, Austria. And it's like, okay, so first we need a complete overhaul of Congress and a different president. And all these other things would have to happen. Now you should work for those things to happen, but you cannot wait for 2 decades for something like that to maybe happen, to fix the problem that, in addition to healthcare, is the biggest strain on Americans' budgets, is housing costs. And it's ever worse for young people who feel bereft at the idea of ever, not just like having a house in the suburbs type thing, but just really any kind of housing security. And so, that's something we need to attack on every possible level. And state and local governments can do a lot there, too. And that's, kind of the other part of the sort of soft secession thing is states and cities have power. They can make things happen. Can they make everything the federal government makes happen? No, not the way things are set up now. But they can do more to get the policies that need to happen in place and to be working, to not just sort of await the largesse of the federal government.
Do you think in this moment, you folks in California, people in blue states generally, would be better off if the Republicans, if we just said, you're right, you know what, the federal government should just be worried about our self-defense. There should be an army and not much else, and we'll take care of the rest in the states. You can charge us only for the army, and we're not going to pay another dollar into the federal government, because California and Illinois and New York, with the exception of Texas, really, all of the states that are above the median in what they give to Washington, in other words, they give more than they get back, are these big blue states. And this would be an enormous difficulty for all of the red states that are takers, to use their language. They get a lot more back than they pay the federal government. Should we just keep that money ourselves and just say, you know what, we're done? This federal experiment isn't going to work. We'll do it differently in our states and your states. We'll defend ourselves together. But other than that, you're on your own.
I mean, I think there's sort of two levels of that. I think one, they should for sure point it out at every possible juncture, and not let this sort of propaganda from red states that's sort of like, that it's blue states that are costing the country money. That's just not true.
It's absolutely not true by any measure. We're the economic engines. I mean, so is Texas, in fairness. But, economic engines in the country.
Economic engines, cultural engines, innovation engines, which is not to malign red states. And I think the kind of conundrum that Democrats are always in is that, they believe in sort of social welfare programs and wanting to help people, including wanting to help people in red states. It's like, please let us, expand Medicare for your people. And Medicaid, sorry. And I think that's in part what's interesting about this healthcare fight right now, because these ACA increases and the Medicaid withering will hit red states worse.
Brutally. But they don't know they're in the ACA because it was rebranded as like Missouri Care.
Right.
Or something.
Kentucky Care or whatever.
Care.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but they will be hit worse. And I think this is because it is, enrollment season, people are logging on to say like, okay, should I, futz around the edges of my plan? And they're like, oh my God, my plan is going to be double or triple the cost. Like most people cannot afford those kind of increases, they'll, at all. Most people are, like Americans are, 40% of Americans don't even have $500 saved up for an emergency. I mean,
Medicare costs are going up too. It's not just Medicaid.
Yep.
I mean, it's really, it's really going to be a wake-up call. And I know when they passed the big ugly bill, they thought they were putting off the worst of it till after the midterms, and they are. But in fact, there's plenty of bad coming now.
Yes, there's plenty of bad coming now, and. So I think I do think that the sort of defection from Marjorie Taylor Greene on this front is super.
Canary in a coal mine.
Canary in a coal mine, and also just that she's doing what literally every other family and household is doing. She's like, wait a minute, my adult kids are going to see their premiums double, and I don't like that. Like we don't have the money to pay for that. And
just one last thought on this, because we are running low on time. This conversation has had the feeling that there are red states and blue states, and they're solidly red and solidly blue. But your state in California has more Republicans in it than any state in the country except Texas. And Texas gave, an enormous amount of Democratic votes to Kamala Harris, more than most other blue states. So, there's this, we haven't segregated ourselves into these states completely yet, particularly the big ones. So to be forced to be at civil war is really going to be painful.
That's right. And I will say that this just speaks to the absolute need to get like if there were no electoral college, Trump would not be behaving this way, right? Because he would be elected by the popular vote and evenly distributed, and the chips would fall where they fall. But these policies are hurting Republicans in California, Republicans in Illinois, Republicans in Chicago. I mean, there's some. I've got family members who probably fit that description.
Yeah.
And and it's so we're having kind of all these levels of minority rule. Like California has 67 times the population of Wyoming, but the same number of senators. Like,
you and I have to do a separate show on that topic.
Okay, we'll do a separate show and all that,
Yeah.
but it is related. The sort of the compromises that we made at the founding, the compromises that led California to be admitted to the Union as a free state, while other states were, like all these sort of compromises that were made that are really coming to a fore right now in a lot of ways, and some of them are over 200 years old. And they're just not wearing well.
That's got to be our last word because we've run out of time. Clara, your work at Mother Jones is awesome. Everybody listening, for gosh sake, support Mother Jones. It's just fabulous. And it's been around since the Civil War, doing great work. Thank you so much.
Well, only since the 70s, but we're...
No, really? I thought it was founded before. It was founded in the 70s?
No. Yes, and the post-Watergate, like a lot of...
post-Watergate, sorry. That wrong tragedy in my head. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
for having me, Edwin.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Folks, I'm very sorry about all of this. So I think we got our problems worked out, and let's get right to it. Curtis Hertel is the chair of the Michigan Democrats. Back in 2022, we helped deliver the first Democratic trifecta in I don't know, half a century in Michigan. And that brought not just Democrats to power, but Democratic governing values to the state. And as a result, tens of thousands of kids got lifted out of poverty. Working men and women can once again form unions without being undermined by the so-called right-to-work laws. The state's ancient abortion law got repealed, and common-sense gun laws were enacted. Do not let anybody tell you that Democrats don't stand for anything except their opposition to Donald Trump. We do. And the difference is measurable in the lives of Michiganders, in part because of the work of Curtis Hertel. Curtis, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin.
So that was a quick summary, but how would you describe the improvement in the lives of Michiganders that's attributable to Democratic governance and the values of the Democratic Party?
So, I came in, we had 11 seats in the state Senate. We were in the super minority. We had less members than the Wu-Tang Clan. We could caucus in an elevator. And it was my job to help recruit candidates and rebuild and just change how we actually talked about issues to actually organize to build towards a majority. And over two cycles, we were able to do that. And the House won as well. Governor Whitberg was reelected. And we had the first Democratic trifecta in 40 years in Michigan. Republicans had gerrymandered our state to the point where they got to keep control, even though Michigan is a very purple state. And so, in fact, my father was the last Democrat who was Speaker of the House, and first real Democrat who was Speaker of the House before term limits. So really, it was full circle for all of us. But I was dribbled out of that body, but I became the governor's legislative director. And in 6 months, Democrats, not only the things that you said, but the largest investment in affordable housing in Michigan history happened. The end of a retirement tax that was regressive for our seniors happened. And really, it's about values. And I think that, if you want to look at what's the difference between the Republican and the Democratic Party is, look what's happening right now in Washington, D.C. Republicans are willing to shut down the government because they want to protect tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires, and we want to fight for actually lowering health care costs for people. That's the difference.
And look, they claim that, we just want to spend money. But isn't it also true that after Democrats got control of the government in Michigan, private investment in the state went up?
Yeah, we had record. If you had told me we were going to be reshoring jobs, if you had said that a decade ago, people would have thought you were crazy. They were waiting for the auto industry to hang up the lights and move to Tennessee or move to Mexico. And we actually were able to bring manufacturing jobs back in partnership with business and labor. And so, to me, what Republicans love is false choices. They tell you that you either have to have union rights or jobs. You either have to protect the environment or have an economy. You got to, that is a false choice to define their narrative. And, one of the things that I think that Democrats don't do a good job at sometimes is we don't go out and tell the story about what we did and what we fight back and what we're trying to fix. And I do think that in the last election cycle, we kind of tried to run as Republican light instead of actually running and talking about the things that we actually get done for people. And that's what, to me, we need a better job of actually defining the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and stop trying to be so afraid of defending who we are.
Yeah, I hate it. Democrats run for office by saying, I'm not that kind of Democrat, because every time that happens, it raises the cost on everybody else who's a Democrat running. We're a big tent. We're not all exactly alike, but we share some common values, and we should lean into those instead of letting Republicans make us embarrassed.
Totally agree. Yeah, I don't care if you call them oligarchs or kings. I can't tell you what I call them on the radio. But what I would rather have is actually us, realize that if we're not the party fighting for fair wages and lowering the cost of health care and making child care affordable, if we're not the party that's making it easier to buy a house in America and all those things, if we're not that party, there won't be a party in America fighting for those things. So we can go ahead and argue about the details of what those things are, but at some point we got to realize that we're on the side of good. I'm a Democrat because I believe the Democratic Party is a force for good in the world. And that's why I wake up every day and do the work that I'm doing. I'm actually in Southfield today. We're running a write-in campaign for a clerk candidate because the clerk was thrown off the ballot, and the only thing left is a MAGA Republican who was at January 6th and who has said that the absentee ballot shouldn't be a thing, and questioned the results of free and fair elections, and now wants to be the clerk in a majority Democratic city. So we're out here with people knocking doors and in concert with this community and trying to make sure that person doesn't become a clerk, because what the Republicans do, they start small. We think big, they start small, and we got to get back to that grassroots, building from the bottom with the Democratic Party.
I want you to help me help everyone listening understand what the Democratic Party is, because it isn't. Every time people say, why don't the Democrats do this? Or why aren't the Democrats doing that? They have some sense of what a political party is that is not square with what a political party actually is in America, or at least not the Democrats. The model is the Republicans like a European political party. They take their cue from the top. They all fall in line. They all say the same thing. They have one ideology, which at the moment is whatever the president wants. So how do we explain what a political party in a country the size of America is, what the difference between what you do in the state and what the DNC does? I think people are they're confused. If you were teaching in college and a student said, sir, what's the Democratic Party? How would you answer that? How would you explain?
Well, first of all, I would say the Democratic Party is the party of working people. And I think I think that one of the things that we as Democrats have forgotten, that is really the soul of who we are. And we are the party that are supposed to be fighting against the economic inequality that has happened in this country and the devastation of what it means to be working class. And we're supposed to be the party that's fighting against those things. And I think that maybe our fear of an over-consult I think it's actually the message that people want. They want fighters. They want people that are committed, are committed to them. And happy warriors, I think, is important for the Democratic Party to be as well. We do have to be optimistic that the work that we're doing can change the world. But I think that really what the Democratic Party is we are a broad spectrum of people that care and believe that the world can be better, but that have different focuses. And we're not as simple as the Republican Party. By the way, that's not a bad thing. I would rather be that.
I agree with you.
I don't want to take orders from one person. I don't want to live in a dictatorship. I always tell people that they should never find a candidate in their lives they agree 100% with, because unless you're the candidate, because 100% only comes with yourself or if you're in a cult. So at some point, you need to actually be willing to the compromise is certainly part of that as well. But, to me, the Democratic Party, on a broad stroke, is a party of working people. Now, at the state level, my job as chair of this party is that I am leading the grassroots and the work that's being done and organizing on the ground of this party. We don't buy ads. We don't hire consultants. We are, I'm one of only 4 state parties in the country that has a full-time organizing program that is every single day. So what do I do on a weekly basis? We're doing town halls in every Republican district to hold Republicans accountable. We're organizing walks and deep canvassing to talk to people about what they're missing from this current administration. We're collecting stories from people about how the federal government and what has happened is affecting them and their families, and telling those stories throughout this state. We just held most Democrats on the state level accountable because they passed one of the worst budgets in history that defunded the police and what they say we are, took money from the Human Trafficking Commission and access to rape kits, mental health for kids, free breakfast and lunch for kids. I think budgets are a statement of values, by the way. You want to look at the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Look who we're fighting for. They're fighting to give tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. These are the things that we're fighting for, to try to make people's lives better. Not a handout. A little easier to raise a family in America and to really live what is supposed to be the American dream.
I think that, I love that. I mean, I think right now the difference between the two parties is they're about organized money and we're about organized people. Period.
That's right.
And so your job is to organize people and get everywhere and do that and give them on-ramps so they can find ways to get involved when they want to make a difference.
No, that's exactly right, and we're providing lots of opportunities. I can tell you that. I mean, I was just with dozens of people knocking doors in Southfield, and there are a lot of opportunities in the Democratic Party right now for people to get organized and to be part of the resistance.
I mean, it's a big state. Detroit is a long way from like Houghton up in the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah.
It's a big state. It's a complicated state with industry and farming, and Antrim County, which you have, was the source of all of that election fraud nonsense in 2020.
Yep.
So how do you also this cycle have big races? I mean, important races for Senate, for governor, for Secretary of State. How do you help win all of those races? And, how does the party handle the campaigns so that the campaigns themselves also help you build the party?
100%. So, this is the first time in Michigan history where we've had an open governor's race, open Senate race, open Secretary of State, open Attorney General. We have 3 seats in Congress that can flip. Control of Washington, and on top of all of that, every seat in our state house and state senate are all up at the same time. That's never happened in Michigan history.
Oh my gosh! I do not envy you this year.
I understand that, but I will say that I took this job for a reason. I mean, when the governor called and said, asked me to consider running for this position, and it's an elected position among members of the Democratic Party, and every Democratic Party member can vote in Michigan. So it's anybody who shows up at a meeting, and we had thousands that showed up. But the reason why that I took this job is because too much about the top of the ticket and not enough about all those down ballot races.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Today, winning the governor's election is important, and it's great. But the governor's a goalie, right? Like the governor by her or himself can stop bad things from happening. But, you know, what you want is somebody who can actually deliver on the promises of what the Democratic Party fights for. And so you need a state house and a state senate. And, you know, I will tell you that I think that in general, one of the biggest problems we had in the presidential election last year was everyone had to look to Delaware to get an answer. And you can't run a campaign in Michigan from Delaware, right? And so we need to be investing in training our own people. We need to be actually running a message that is Michigan-based, not, you know, somewhere else. Because Michigan is very different. And you're right that actually Michigan is different even in the fact that a message in Detroit is different than a message in Dowagiac up in the UP. So, I mean, like, you know, like, so, like, for me, like, that's the whole or in the UP, sorry. And my point with all of that is that this is an opportunity for us to, because we have all new candidates and a new world to shape in that sense, to really have excitement in the Democratic Party, but also rebuild what a real coordinated campaign looks like. And for me, that's about boots on the ground. I think field is more important than it's ever been. People don't watch TV in the same way they do as before. They're getting so many emails and text messages from candidates. You know, they know that the mail they're getting is lies and everything else. But the one thing that is rare and unique in this world is face-to-face contact. And so I think that the ability to have a people-centered party that is doing that work on the ground is actually the path forward to winning elections. And I will tell you where they beat us was actually in that, and they had a much deeper field program than we had. We had a lot of people going, but they ran a deeper system, and I think that's one of the things that we're working with the DNC to change, but also changing right here at home in the Michigan Democratic Party.
That's important to hear. I love that. I mean, I know my own experience, nothing beats door to door. Look, I got to ask you a very hard question here before we go. The Gaza war helped Donald Trump win in Michigan. What outreach is happening, say, in Dearborn, to bring these folks back into the...
So I was the first chair that was endorsed by both the Arab Caucus and the Jewish Caucus. And we have them actually working together right now on joint messaging, not on Gaza, but on immigration raids and the things that are happening here in Michigan. And I will tell you that I think the Democratic Party tried to ignore what was happening, and that is never going to be the answer. I had people in Dearborn that said that they knew the Trump administration, the Trump campaign was using them, but at least they were being used because no one from the Democratic Party would even talk to them. That is what has to change. And I will tell you that we are doing that work in concert with people on the ground. You know, I know that there are some people that will say, well, if you voted, if you weren't with us last time, then we don't want you. Well, you know, we're never going to win an election in America if that's the case. We got to give people grace and ability and the ability to listen to actually bring people back.
I don't even understand that. I don't understand that at all. The only math that matters in campaigns is addition.
Yes, exactly. We got to stop. There's a problem, Edwin. I know you don't have much time left, but I want to say this. There's a problem in the Democratic Party that we want to be we're more concerned sometimes about being right than winning. And I want to be right and also win. Right? I mean, like those two should not be mutually exclusive things. But we got to go. That means that we can't just accept the fact that we are good and decent people and people will vote for us. We got to go out and make the case. You got to go out and have the argument. You got to go and listen to people that disagree with you. You got to give people the grace that voted a different way the space to come back. And I don't blame this country for Donald Trump. I blame us. You know, there's a line in the movie American President that if you don't give people water, they'll drink sand. Trump is sand. He is nonsense. He is blame. But that means that we got to give people water. That's how we get them back into the Democratic Party. That's how we get them back in the fold.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm seeing something here in my city as Donald Trump sends his troops here and terrorizes communities in my city. What I'm seeing is Washington is a dead end. It's just a plain dead end for the future of the country, these guys right now. But there's a rebirth here. I mean, I'm seeing people who don't have kids or their kids are grown up showing up outside schools every day in crowds to help make sure those kids get safely out and back at home because they're worried about them. I'm seeing folks bring food to people who are afraid to go out these days. I mean, we're seeing what you never see in Washington anymore: common decency, a sense of community, and a determined sense to be free. I just think that it's inspiring in a way that's going to help us win everything back.
I agree, and I will say this, that all great movements, including the founding of America, was because of good and decent people like that.
Yeah.
And that's really what the spirit and soul of this country is. Forget the documents and the history for a second. Just the spirit of what our country is that exact thing right there. The belief that it can be better and the fight for a more perfect union. And so I want to give the Democratic Party that same exact soul that I think is why this country is great. And why Donald Trump will never understand you can't make America great again, because that's what's great about America.
That's a great place to end. Listen, I really appreciate your time. I know you have a ton to do because nothing is time-consuming as knocking on a million doors. And I really appreciate what you're doing to continue to build, this great Democratic Party in Michigan.
Thank you, my friend. Let's stay in the fight. Let's go win, and I look forward to being on again sometime.
And I just want to say, if we meet on a different field later this year, go Cubs.
Well, I'm already out. The Tigers got out last night. So
they did? I missed that. I'm so sorry.
We lost in inning 15. It was a long night.
Oh, no, I missed that.
I was out back in the morning.
All right.
But I'll just say, if we meet on a different field, go Lions.
Yeah. All right. Fair is fair. Right, enjoy. Talk to you soon. Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
You bet. All right, everybody. We'll be back. Don't go away.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. G. Elliott Morris is a data-driven journalist with an expertise in polling. His book, Strength in Numbers, How Polls Work and Why We Need Them, made the point that acknowledged that polling is not popular, but made the point that it's much more than about predicting elections. It's about a way for the public to be heard, and that actually strengthens democracy. His Substack account, also called Strength in Numbers, is one of the fastest-growing political sites on Substack. Elliot, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Edwin, for having me.
No, I really appreciate it. Hey, to what do you attribute, I guess I should say, the astounding interest in your site and in polling data now?
I'm sorry, this won't happen again, but I did miss the first half of your question. Could you just repeat it?
Sure. To what extent do you attribute this astounding interest in polling data and in your site in particular right now? And I know that people are angry about polls. So to what do you attribute this really amazing interest?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm calling from my basement. I've moved outside. So listen, here's the thing. Polling is really tough. It's hard from a numerical perspective because you are calling 1,000 people and hoping that they are representative of 200 million adults or 180 or so million voters, and that math is just hard. Back in the old days when polls were just getting started in 1930 or so, if you called 1,000 people, pretty much all of them answered. And so there was a pretty good chance that if those people were randomly selected, that they would be representative. Now, Edwin, if you call 1,000 people, only one or two will answer. So for a poll of 1,000 people, you got to call about 100,000. And the chance that these people are representative is much lower. And that means that the margin of error for the surveys, about 3 or 4%, is quite large, and the surveys are very fragile. And this matters because at the same time as polls have been getting harder to do, our expectations for them have been going up. We've been expecting them to be more and more precise. Election forecasting as a tool, people will know the name Nate Silver. They'll know of polling aggregation websites like Real Clear Politics or 538, formerly at ABC News until it was shut down. They set our expectations for surveys to be incredibly high. And this sort of double whammy just makes it really hard to trust polling. But I'm here to tell you that on average, actually, the polls are good. They're about as accurate as they've always been, despite the challenges. And so what we really need to do is just reframe our expectations for them. We shouldn't expect them to be delivering predictions for elections that are accurate to within 1 or 2 percentage points, but they can tell us pretty reliably when the people think the American government is off on the right track, not solving the issues that matter to people. Inflation being the biggest one over the last 5 years, or just what people generally want from the representatives. And polls are still pretty good at that. And so to directly answer your question, I think people just want to hear what people want. As simple as that is. The public is very interested in public opinion.
Right. I know what I think. Am I an outlier? Yeah. So let's talk about what Americans think. I got sort of a series of questions under that sort of general heading. What do Americans think? So let's start with one you already mentioned. What's their current thinking on inflation?
Yeah, on inflation, voters think that the government has not solved the problem. You'll remember inflation was about 8 or 9% peaking in Joe Biden's term. It's better now. Yep. It's about 3% still. So that means costs are still going up. And they blame the government for this. If you ask them how they feel about Donald Trump's handling of inflation, his numbers are about 30 or 35 percentage points underwater. And when I say that, I mean 65% of the public says he's not handling the issue well. And those are the same numbers that Joe Biden got before voters, threw out the Democratic Party leadership. So they're very unhappy and they want a solution, and they don't feel like they're getting one, despite Donald Trump's promises on the campaign last year.
Well, okay. How about this? What do they think about the economy and tariffs?
Yeah, in general, basically any question about the economy is bad right now. That includes inflation. Inflation is the worst. But we've had some bad jobs reports over the last 6 months. Jobs themselves are growing at a low rate, and depending on the industry, they're contracting. We've lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs since Trump took office, for example, despite, again, his claims to be helping the manufacturing industry. And so his numbers there are also 20, 25 points underwater. On tariffs, the American people say they don't like them. About 57, 58% of the American public in my polling says they would rather not have tariffs if that meant that prices are going to rise. So people understand these as taxes on their goods, and of course that means inflation, which they don't like. So Trump's numbers on those tariffs also, 15 or 20 points underwater.
And is it too early to ask thoughts about the shutdown?
Shutdown, that's a great question. We do have numbers on a blame question. Who do you blame for the shutdown? We don't know. We won't know about impacts beyond that. On this question, the American people are somewhat split, but they blame Republicans more than they blame Democrats. About 35% of people say they blame Republicans for the shutdown. In my polling, it strengthened numbers. And about 24% say they blame the Democrats. The rest say they blame both parties equally. And that's another point that comes out of my work. There's just a lot of people out there that are really dissatisfied and disaffected with politics. Yeah. They don't feel like either party is really sticking out for them.
I get that. I think that's actually fair. Is it too early to talk about opinions about the healthcare cuts that are coming?
That might be a little too early for, and the reason is because most of those cuts just aren't going to be priced in until closer or after the 2026 election. So I can give you some numbers, but what I would be doing was sort of speculating about how many Americans are going to figure out about these cuts. But what we know is, of course, people don't like their entitlements being taken away from them. So I don't anticipate the reaction will be positive once people learn about this.
Yeah. All right. Unless you think there are other sort of ideas where you want to tell us where Americans are thinking that are interesting, I might change the subject a little and say, looking at the collection of voters who gave Donald Trump his majority, which components of that majority are now soft, are now in play for Democrats?
Yeah, this is your show, so I will take your lead. On this question, this is great. I will pick out two groups for you. These are the groups that the mainstream media really focused on as core parts of Trump's victory, voters that he managed allegedly to pull away from Democrats. These two groups are young people, people under 30, and Latino voters, or Hispanics. These groups moved about 20 points towards Republicans from the 2020 to 2024 elections. So whereas young people were voting about 20 points or 30 points for Democrats previously, they were voting, about 10 points for Democrats in 2020. And Hispanics moved from being a Democrat plus 10 group to a Trump plus 10 group. So these are big swings, and they were real in the 2024 election. But my case at the time was that these swings were less about Trump and more about the economy, and that voters were just dissatisfied with the incumbent party's handling of inflation in particular, but just the economy in general. And this theory is, I think, very persuasive because if you look at every other country that had an election between 2022 and 2024, those voters threw out their incumbent party leadership. This happened in basically every other Western democracy before the United States. And in fact, the swing against the incumbent parties there was larger than the one we saw in the United States. So vote share, the percent of the vote the incumbent party was getting in those other countries, fell by about 7 points. And in America, it fell about 2. So Kamala Harris actually did better than expectations based on this broader anti-incumbent wave. So anyway, that's just to say that if that's true, then you shouldn't expect them those groups, young people and Hispanics, to stay, pro-Trump. Or really even young people never were. They were just less pro-democratic. And now it looks like they've gone back the other direction. Both of these groups give Trump an approval rating about 30 percentage points lower than the one they gave him at the start of his term. He's really lost ground, and if you ask them why, they say it's because of inflation and the economy. They don't feel like he's delivering on his promises to cut prices.
Wow. That feels so interesting. So, okay. And what about other sort of big demographic groups? I mean, the abortion issue we've heard so much about for so many years. It's so important to so many people. It's very much a partisan issue in America. Is it still driving voter behavior?
Yeah, great question. So if you ask the American people what is their top issue, then very few say abortion. But of course, the people who are most likely to say this are college-educated whites and women in general. Those two groups were the groups that moved least toward Donald Trump in 2024 and are still very dissatisfied by his leadership. And if you ask them what policy fix they want, some of them will say, they'd like to codify Roe, put into law protections for abortions up until however many weeks, the third trimester. But it's really not a big priority for most people these days. This is sort of the old wisdom in American political science, is that most voters are just driven by the prices on the grocery shelf or gas. Before our program, there was a commercial about how expensive gas has gotten, and that's the biggest issue for most American people. And it's also still a big issue for these groups that are sensitive to abortion. Healthcare, I think, will be the hinge issue over the next 8 months as you're thinking about other issues that might persuade people. Like I said, if people start to lose those benefits, if if the shutdown isn't resolved by way of extending Obamacare subsidies, then I imagine this question, what issues are the most important to you? I imagine healthcare will start to really increase on that question, and that's to be expected. This was the big issue of the 2018 midterms, and most Americans now have a favorable opinion of Obamacare. They don't want their healthcare subsidies from the government to cut.
Wow. When you just think of the history of the ACA, that is really amazing. What about farmers? You know, they for all sorts of reasons have been the bedrock of Republican Party for a generation, and yet the tariffs hit them enormously hard. Is there any movement in rural America?
Yeah, what I'll tell you, I don't have a cross tab on farmers in particular.
Okay.
But what I'll tell you is that in states like Iowa and Nebraska, where farming is number one industry, those states have swung hard against President Trump. Polls of those states asking voters how they feel about the president show, again, a massive 20-point swing against the president.
Yeah.
And when you ask them why, they say prices and they say tariffs. They say the soybeans rotting in their fields that they can't sell to China. So that is a really big issue, and it's not. I think you're right to pick up on it. A lot of the times we're told these are sort of created by social media, but at least in the polls, and this is why we have them, this shows up as well. Farmers are unhappy.
It just says, like, if you're sending Democrats to go talk to people, they shouldn't ignore rural America. They should go out there and talk to them. Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. So interesting. Okay. I got a different kind of question now. Like, I hear from young people that the party has to embrace more Mamdani, and from, older Dems and funders that the party should avoid going to Mamdani because they have to go center to win. And I wonder if there's anything in your data that informs that. I have my own views. Boy, do I have my own views, but I'd love to be informed by actual data.
Sure. Let me give you a different way to think about this question, and give your audience a different way to think about it. So yes, there's this debate in the Democratic Party. Do they go left or do they go right? And this question implies that everyone in America views themselves on some one-dimensional, line from left to right, some ideological spectrum, and that they vote for whichever candidate is closest to them. My grandmother is going home and she's watching the news and she's writing down everyone's stances on every issue and then picking the one that will be best for her. But this is what we call a folk theorem of democracy, and this is just not how people make their decisions. So giving advice to parties on who they should nominate based on purely on ideology of the candidates is not good strategy, and because it elides two big factors, and that is one, identity. Who do you like? Who do you identify with? And second is new issues. Affordability right now being the big one. Affordability is not a left or a right issue. It's on a completely different axis. It's a different spectrum for American politics. You can have a right-leaning politician that's focused on affordability. That's Trump in 2024, ostensibly, right? Maybe not really. Or you could have a left-leaning politician that's focused on so-called economic populism and affordability and prices of healthcare and whatnot. And so the case for Zoran Mamdani, if I would make it, would be that he is changing up the left versus right, or in this case, the left versus center-left debate in the Democratic Party by offering voters a new lens with which they can see him through, and that is on affordability. He's saying, maybe I call myself a democratic socialist, but it's not because I'm a Marxist or, I hate centrists. It's because this is the best way to produce a sort of affordability agenda for the American people, or in his case, just New Yorkers. And again, if you ask people what's the number one issue they care about, it is this issue. It's affordability. So Democrats in the aftermath of his victory used another word which is authenticity, and that's another consideration here. You don't want to be nominating a centrist candidate that's inauthentic. I'm in Virginia, so the guy I think of is Terry McAuliffe running for governor in 2021. And I was just a bad campaign.
I think a lot alike.
Yeah, he had no authenticity. Yeah. And so that's it, right? If you have a candidate focused on authenticity and affordability, then maybe the whole left versus center thing doesn't matter so much to the American people. And we'll see if that's true.
I want to just tell you a story. When Jimmy Carter, which is before your time, when Jimmy Carter was running for president, he went to the Chicago Tribune editorial board, and almost nobody knew who he was at the beginning. And they said to him, Governor, do you really think, liberals up north are going to vote for a Southern Baptist preacher? And he just looked at them and he said, human beings are more complicated than you think. They're not one-dimensional. Right. And sure enough, he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. These narrow ways we think voters favor often get us into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, this is what we call in my field like really over-determined. There's just so many complex factors that go into how people vote. And it's very common in Washington, where I spend a lot of my time, to sort of shoehorn both yourselves as the analyst and voters, saying, we'll have to pick this policy that's closest to the median, or we can't, take these stances that might be unpopular at first, but maybe we can convince people to come around to them. And that sort of creative thinking about politics, the type of creativity that Jimmy Carter had, is sort of sorely lacking in most of the analyst base.
Yeah. Hey, one of those issues I forgot to ask you about, and I should have, was the democracy itself. And it's one that's near and dear to me. And I can't tell if people are more concerned about that now than they used to, if that rises to something that, people say, hey, we're worried about that.
Yeah, on democracy, I think pollsters don't ask the question you want them to ask, which is how important is democracy to you, but they do ask, how important are civil rights to you. And in YouGov's polling, this issue was the top issue among 2% of voters in 2024. And today it's the top issue among 15%, according to YouGov's polling. I believe that number is right. I will fact check myself later. It's between 10 and 15. So that's a big change. And it's indicative that voters are seeing, I think, what you and I might call sort of transgressions against the Constitution. From authoritarianism, crackdowns on civil liberty that come when you have less democracy. So I would sort of hazard a guess that democracy is more important to people now than it used to be. But more importantly, people see these attacks on civil liberties as bad and important, and they want politicians to deal with them.
How do they feel about you can't ask anybody in Chicago this question. It'll be 100%. How do they feel about sending troops to American cities?
Oh, great question. We asked this in my poll at Strength in Numbers, which I do with the polling company Verisight. We asked this in September. We asked them a very specific question, which was, do you support Donald or the president using the National Guard to aid in the enforcement of immigration operations? So it's very narrow. We're talking about immigration, not just in general. But on this question, the public was split about 60-40. 55-45 against the issue. They don't like the president using military troops to sort of patrol U.S. streets for this particular instance. And that's important because deportations of unauthorized criminal undocumented immigrants, ones who have been sort of convicted or alleged,
I can imagine
accused of committing crimes. Yeah, people don't like that. So I would think this was the most popular way to get troops in American cities, and people still don't like it.
Yeah. When they see what they're doing here, they're going to like it even less, for sure.
Right.
All right. I sort of want to end with a conversation with you about polling versus leading. And I guess it goes back a little to your authenticity discussion of candidates. But if you have a candidate or advisors to candidates who say, look, here's the window of where America is today, And you have to be sort of in the center of that if you're going to win. You hear that a lot from people. But Republicans have not, on the Democratic side, Republicans have focused for a generation on moving that middle, on leading the country to the right, so that if a Democrat is just trying to stay in the middle of the polling data, they're going to move to the right far with the country. There has to be some way to talk about momentum in one direction or another, to measure, to help inform the discussion of how you move a population in a direction, not just how you sit in the middle of a snapshot of that dynamic population.
Yeah, there's this old, I did lots of research into this for my book, there's this old idea that politicians can be split into two camps, delegates or trustees. Where they are trusted by their representatives, by their constituents to lead, to take positions that would be the best for their constituents over the long term, or to just do whatever the delegates want them to do. And most political science over the last 80 years, this is a concept from far before that, but it was really formalized in the 40s. Says that you really need a healthy balance of both of those things. Yes, there's some elements of this that if you're just following the public opinion polls, then people will see you as inauthentic. That is a more modern take on this. But if you ask voters what they want, do you want someone? We did this in our survey a couple months ago. Do you want someone who's just taking the positions on the issues, or someone who will lead, someone who might fight on your behalf? Then people overwhelmingly want this sort of fighter, trustee type of representative rather than a pure delegate. So while we're having these conversations about what the Democrats should do, should they go towards the middle or the left? Should they just follow the public opinion polls, just take a sort of holistic view of the country, or should they lead? Then at least the polls suggest that they should lead.
They should lead, yeah. Well, and I think that describes some of Donald Trump's appeal to Americans. They disagree with him. He's certainly not a delegate. They disagree with him on most issues, and pretty profoundly on some of them. But he at least demonstrates in his governing style energy. I'm doing things. And I think people like that. I mean, they like it enough to forgive him for a whole bunch of stuff they actually hate. And I just think there's so much of the stuff they hate, it's going to overwhelm what they like. But I do think people give him credit for energetically trying to do stuff in a way they did not see from Joe Biden.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always go back to this example. In the 2016 Republican primary, the conventional wisdom was, of course, that all Republican primary voters are like extreme Republicans on every issue. And Donald Trump's original instinct about politics was that this wasn't true, that there were a lot of moderate Republican primary voters, especially on entitlements. And if you defend their entitlements from a sort of populist or anti-elitist, really, perspective, point of view, then you can win over those voters more than, a Jeb Bush or a Scott Walker, thinking back to the 2016 campaign, could.
Yep.
So he himself, right, someone who we say is a popular leader because of his moderate, originally his moderate policy preferences, especially for entitlements, actually is successful because he was brave in taking those positions, and because he was sort of heterodox in doing so. And so that that itself, he is the dominant, right, like cult of personality figure in American political history now, and he managed to do that by taking positions that people ahead of time would not have predicted would have been successful, and that's a usable lesson for the left.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. All right. Well, look, your work is fabulous. Strength in Numbers is terrific. Tell everybody how they can sign up and be part of your Substack community and can stay informed on these issues.
Yeah, you can Google for my Substack, just Strength in Numbers. It's at the URL gelliottmorris.com, my name. That's 2 L's and 2 T's. And you can subscribe for free. You'll get 2 or 3 articles a week, or a premium subscription for more content and to join the community. I'm also on most social media just by my name, G. Elliott Morris.
Yeah, and your Substack work is terrific. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Edwin.
Yeah, talk to you soon. Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, we'll take a break for the news, and then a really interesting conversation that I had yesterday and recorded with Amy Maxman. And Paul, if you don't mind, when we come back, I want to say something right before we go into that.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Hey, listen, before we go into this interview, which is with a reporter who covers health policy in America, and it's absolutely fabulous. But after it was recorded last night, yesterday, the Trump administration completely gutted the CDC. And you'll find in the interview, I asked her whether we are better, whether we learned anything from COVID, whether we are prepared, for a pandemic to come. And she said, no, we didn't. But she still had some confidence that there were experts in the CDC. And she wrote this morning to me saying, I know we have this interviews airing, but oh my gosh, the CDC has been gutted, and that's catastrophic. And now I want you to hear Amy Maxman, who's just terrific.
When most people talk about our news ecosystem, they think about political news, they think about entertainment or sports or sort of general purpose news organization. But, in fact, some of the best journalism sits in far more focused news organizations. KFF, for example, is the gold standard for news about health policy in the United States. They excel at things like polling and policy analysis and providing health information and journalism. And within that fabulous organization, Amy Maxman is a star. She's KFF's national public health correspondent, and I'm thrilled that she's joining us today. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you so much.
Hey, before we get into the news and the questions about healthcare in America, I think people would be fascinated to learn a little bit more about you, some of the reporting you've done around the world, and particularly your work in outbreaks that actually sound terrifying.
Yeah, so I've been reporting on public health around the world for over a decade now. The reason why I've been why I was drawn into reporting on outbreaks is actually because it's the confluence of so many things. It's the virus or the pathogen itself, the kind of biological side, which I always find interesting. But then there's everything about culture and how that will shape how infections travel. It's a lot about policy and about governments and politics. So it kind of has a lot of things coming together, and I'm sort of a person that thinks about systems, so that's an appealing place for me to be.
Yeah. What were some of just to give people a sense, some of the outbreaks that you found yourself spending time in and around?
I had, I've reported on malaria a lot. Kind of the thing that also just, I dove into is in 2014 and 2015, when there was the biggest Ebola outbreak that the world's ever seen, even to this day in West Africa, I went to Sierra Leone and I ended up spending 3 months there during the Ebola outbreak. So that was kind of when I just started seeing how even the local politics within different cities really mattered for how bad an outbreak was. So that was very fascinating. I went to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, actually when Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the WHO, was there. So I spent time with him and the WHO in Congo during that Ebola outbreak, and then I was here in the U.S. during COVID, and I was sort of this is it. This is the thing that I thought was going to happen, and here we are.
Well, being around in an Ebola outbreak sounds absolutely terrifying, but also, I guess, in its own way, fascinating. You learn a lot. I want to let's say I'm curious about what we learned. I mean, in Trump's first term, we had COVID, this incredibly terrible global pandemic, and our response was, my words, not yours, but divisive and incoherent. Trump, too, began with a measles outbreak. Did the administration learn any lessons from COVID that helped them do a better job with measles?
No. In fact, it seems the U.S. in general has kind of gone in the opposite direction, which has been pretty disheartening. You know, I think a lot of my writing in COVID was sort of to say, not just my writing, so many journalists, so many epidemiologists, researchers, there was all of this work done, like, you know, how can we roll out testing faster? How can we respond quicker? How can we get information out there better? And in fact, it seems the U.S. has sort of gone in the opposite direction, most pointedly with vaccines. But yeah, and so with the measles outbreak, you could really see what happens when there's interference at the top.
So, I mean, the lessons we could have learned, if and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like in an outbreak of any kind of infectious disease, testing, contact tracing, public information are essential to do as rapidly and as effectively as you can.
Exactly. Like the way speed is the main thing. It's like a fire. You know, when it's small, you can put it out fairly easily. The bigger it gets, these massive wildfires, the harder they are to control, the more damage is done. Nobody wants, like, kids to not be able to go to school. Nobody wants businesses to shut down. So ideally, the whole idea is to move really quickly so that, you know who's infected. You can isolate the people who are infected. If there's vaccines, use vaccines to limit the spread of a thing, to act fast before it gets really out of control.
And limiting the spread not only protects the individuals who would be infected, but if I'm right, also makes it harder for the virus to have a reservoir of bodies in which it can continue to mutate and evade our defenses. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it kind of, it gives the virus less of a reservoir. I mean, we might get to we're on track to get to a place where measles, we eliminated measles from the U.S. in 2000, which just means it's not spreading kind of regularly within the U.S. There's always cases that, people come from abroad where there's more measles and they're unvaccinated, they come back, and there's a couple of cases that happens. But we've eliminated it in the U.S., but there's already kind of modeling papers just sort of tracking when it's going to come back with our levels of vaccination going down.
Okay. So there were lessons I don't want to go, I did at the time blame the Trump administration for its handling of COVID, but that's history. But you could say they could have learned from that, and when they had another opportunity, done a better job. And your sense, I can't tell, what did happen with measles? Was it even worse in the way it was handled?
Yeah. So to go back to February. So in February, you've got this measles outbreak in West Texas. And, I was talking to people on the ground in West Texas, local health officials, and there was every sign that this was not going to be one of those outbreaks where somebody returns from, say, the UK and they infect somebody else and then it sort of fizzles out after, say, 10 cases. This was not that, because by the time that they detected the first cases, people were already in the hospital, which means there's many more cases that were just undetected. And there was really low rates of vaccination. There were schools where, say, 40% of kindergartners had their MMR vaccine. So there was every sign that this was going to be a really bad outbreak. And therefore, like I said, you've got to act really fast because it was slated to be bad. At this same time in February, that's when first the Trump administration had put a freeze on communications when Trump took office for a couple of weeks, but that kind of quietly lasted at the CDC. So CDC staff were not allowed to communicate with their partners on the ground, like local health officials. And what I did is I sent Freedom of Information Act requests to the local health departments, also to, I should say, the state and the CDC, which didn't return them. But I did get email records from local health departments, and you just see the health officials saying, we really need to consult with the CDC. Is there a way I can talk with the CDC? And that was just met by crickets. So at that time at the CDC, there was, kind of a silencing that was happening. And also it was being gutted. There were those first huge layoffs in February.
Yeah. Amy, I don't understand. I just don't understand. What was the purpose of saying to the CDC in a health emergency, you're not allowed to talk to anybody?
I don't know the purpose, but what's been happening is, there's a real attempt to gain control over federal agencies, and the CDC is a prime target of that control. And I think that was all part of it. I don't know if it was specifically about measles. I really don't know about that. But
they never, I'm sorry, they never stated a reason. They've
never stated a reason. And I should say, I reached out to the CDC, I reached out to the White House, I reached out to HHS, and I did not get a response to very pointed questions about all of this. But I know from talking with people within the CDC at that time that they were not able to talk freely. They had to walk they had to walk on a tightrope about what they could say at all, if anything.
During an outbreak.
And, the CDC is, we think a lot about their recommendations, but a huge point of having a national public health agency is outbreak response. They're really an emergency response organization in part. And it could be a cancer cluster or a salmonella outbreak or measles or something else like COVID that happens. And we need them to act quickly and not be kind of bogged down by rules like this that kind of bar them from talking. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to this, I think, to the CDC. No, let's stay with the CDC for a minute. You've been paying attention to, I guess, the Trump's administration's, how do I say this, evolving ideas about science and health, although maybe they don't have any and it's all about control. I just don't know. Their approach to medications, their investment in research, professionalism of the CDC. Let's focus on the CDC for a minute. What is going on there, and how? Every president, they get elected, they have policy responsibilities. But your sense that the Trump administration's leadership at the CDC is not really just about policy, but about something else that isn't tied to public health?
It's really hard for me to know what motives are, but I can
strike the question.
Yeah, it's okay. I can say what's happening. Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah.
What's happening is, first, there's these mass layoffs. So most divisions of the CDC, the directors are now ousted. They've either resigned under pressure, they've been laid off, or they've been kind of removed and put in kind of positions where they're really quieted. So there's been, just massive gutting at the CDC. There's been kind of interference in the way that the CDC is able to fund programs. I have a new story that will be coming out soon that's sort of about this. So they couldn't, for example, with measles, Texas asked for money to help with their very expensive measles response in March. It didn't arrive until May from the federal budget. So there's sort of this gutting of what the CDC can do. And at the same time, you have Robert Kennedy, Health and Human Services Secretary, and he is, one, putting in some people who have really fringe ideas, who have promoted sort of just complete misinformation about vaccines and more. So those people are being put into office. During the measles outbreak, RFK, kept talking about vitamin A as if, listen, he didn't say it in these words, but he would completely constantly repeat various rumors that are wrong about measles vaccines, saying, they have fetus debris in them, which they don't, saying that they cause encephalitis, which is brain swelling, and they don't do that. So he would be saying this about vaccines, which understandably would make parents nervous, and then kind of suggesting that vitamin A would be able to quickly treat any problems. And he even, talking with people within the CDC, he told the CDC to really invest, look into vitamin A, which they did, and the studies on vitamin A really show that it's helpful in countries, within sub-Saharan Africa where there's really high vitamin A deficiency, where there's malnourishment. But there's nothing really suggesting that it's very helpful in places like the U.S. where vitamin A deficiency is around 1%. So it can be helpful when people are very deficient. There's nothing to say it's helpful here, and it's certainly not a reason to not get vaccinated.
Amy, did anyone overdose on vitamin A? Were there any bad side effects from people who just said, I'm going to really take as much of this as I can?
Yeah, so in the emails, once again, the emails I got from local health departments, there were doctors saying, we're seeing kids come in with really high levels of vitamin A in their blood. Vitamin A can be really toxic. It can cause liver damage. It can damage fetuses. So we'll see, are there, problems with babies being born, or maybe we won't be able to know if that's the case. But it can be toxic because it's not water soluble. So talking with people again in the CDC, they were just so nervous. They tried to, put all this stuff in there. They had to insert vitamin A into kind of the public releases they put out. They would try and caveat it by saying, talk to your doctor first. They'll only do it under a doctor's supervision. But you can buy vitamin A from pharmacies, and sure enough, there were pharmacies saying vitamin A is flying off the shelf in West Texas.
Okay, so you've described a CDC that had its scientific expertise gutted, that there was interference, political interference with the funding, that some of their recommendations now are hoaxy. Should Americans be really concerned that if there is another contagious outbreak, something like COVID, that we are even in worse shape than we were when that epidemic came to our shores, that we're really unprepared?
I feel like there's no doubt. There is, without a doubt, we are in such worse shape right now. A huge reason is because of, since 2020, it's become very political to take points of view on public health. There's a lot of polling from KFF that shows, and I should say the polling side is very separate from the journalism side, but they do great polling. There's a lot of polls suggesting that, there's a huge split between Republicans and Democrats in what they believe about matters of public health, and that's because of, what various leaders say or don't say. And so that's going to be incredibly dangerous, just sort of trying to play to a base versus saying, as a government, let's be responsible and have one voice on, what we think is the best move that's informed by evidence. So I think without a doubt we'll be in worse shape now. And on top of that, you've got this, massive kind of these vaccine questioning that's not helpful. Let's
talk about that. I want to talk about that. I mean, Secretary Kennedy, I think this week, what did he say this week that was so crazy? Circumcision causes autism or something?
Oh, yeah. Every week there's something, huh? So, and the funny thing is I knew about this one because I've read a lot of Children's Health Defense. This is this anti-vaccine organization that he founded before becoming our health secretary. And they've written about this circumcision stuff before. So basically, Kennedy was talking about this sort of link between circumcision and Tylenol and autism. For all of this, Children's Health Defense sort of referred to this kind of paper that was in, a scientific journal from scientists. It wasn't like even I don't want to call it a study. It was basically kind of like I call it a hypothesis generating paper, where basically the researchers were like, gee, I wonder if Tylenol given early in life could be linked to autism. And they sort of did a quick and dirty sort of job of being like, well, listen, there's not good data on how much Tylenol little kids take. So maybe we could look at like circumcision and make an assumption that, baby boys are given Tylenol after circumcision and therefore look for rates of circumcision in different countries and rates of autism. Now, there's all sorts of caveats, and they have a whole, they have paragraphs at the bottom of their paper about like, this is not, maybe basically the take home was why an epidemiologist should look into a possible connection between Tylenol early in life and autism. They simply are saying maybe this should be studied. I'm sure there's a lot of debates about should they have published this or not, but nonetheless, they did it kind of in a way that, if I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, was just sort of like, yeah, maybe this is worth thinking about, and here's a way to do it. Children's Health Defense and Kennedy ran with this as if it's like a finding, and it is nothing like that. Everything, a lot of what he said, I've realized, he'll mention scientific papers, but it's like he puts them through some sort of like funhouse mirror where that's not what the paper's saying at all.
We had this with Tylenol. Like, talk about what the author of the study he cited said, and this crazy president saying to, pregnant women, when I think maybe the only painkiller they can take is Tylenol, suffer. Don't do it.
Yes. So I spoke with the author of one of the papers they referred to support their position. And, here's the thing, whereas with vaccines and autism, there's been so many large studies really showing there's no association between vaccination in childhood and autism. That is, I feel confident in saying that's known. Don't worry about it. With Tylenol, there's just not as much good work on it, and it's really hard to study. Again, hard to know how much Tylenol pregnant people take during, when they're pregnant. So there's this study, and the author looked at like what's been done in the area, and they sort of said, there's really signs of maybe there is kind of a correlation here. Maybe there's kind of connections between how much Tylenol somebody takes when they're pregnant and autism. There's other studies showing that kind of link falls apart when you take into account genetics and things like that. I would say, talking to a lot of autism researchers, my take home is most of them have, who've looked at the data think, no, there's probably not a link. However, nobody I talked to, the scientists weren't like 100% there's no link. Which is only to say probably not. And I should say the studies that find a link, it's a very small association, and it would be coupled with other things like genetics we know underlies autism. So it would be coupled with other things, and it's small, so it in no way would account for the epidemic that we're seeing. I don't want to use Kennedy's words. I take that back. It would in no way account for high rates of autism. It's small. It's a small effect, if anything. So it's one thing. I can actually say I would be sympathetic to an idea of saying, let's fund more research in this area, or let's convene a panel of scientists to really look at the data hard and think about this. I'm personally in favor of that. That's fine. That's not what happened. What happened at this historic announcement that, has been alluded to all year long by the Trump administration is they pretended here it is. We found a major cause. We've got the solution. And that's really problematic. Trump threw vaccines into the mix, which there's no evidence for. It was a wild conference. It really was.
Well, didn't the author of the study say, whoa, that this is not what I meant?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. When I talked to her, even in the weeks leading up to it, she was just saying she was feeling really sick to her stomach. Because she wanted, I think, I wrote a piece that was just sort of nuanced on this where, like I said, there's researchers who do want to see, are there risks of certain factors? Are there risks out there? We want to know that. It takes time to do the genuine research. The answers are often kind of not clear. Like even the conclusion of their own paper is maybe more judicious use of Tylenol. Maybe, if you have a little headache, don't go for it, which is fine. That's a fine recommendation.
What you're saying to me is if a researcher says, I think there's a topic we haven't looked into enough and we should look into some more.
Yeah.
The administration says, see, we told you it's true.
Yes. They kind of turn it into doubt. They kind of turn questions into misinformation to scare people and to pretend that they've got these simple solutions when, quite honestly, a lot of the problems we have today and are systemic. They're complicated. And they require kind of large-scale changes. Like there's more evidence that say air pollution might contribute to some autism cases, but that would require regulations and a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, that's not on their agenda.
No,
sure.
It's not.
So, and this whole undermining of vaccine thing and the changing of the committee that approves, what vaccines have to be out there. What do you make of that?
It's extremely troubling. It's extremely troubling the way that RFK just fired all of these people who have real expertise in vaccines and immunology, and he replaced them with, anybody who's been in public health for a while. We were kind of guessing who he was going to put on, kind of like the who's who of misinformation spreaders out there. And he sort of, packed the committee with people like this. And yeah, we know that Susan Menares, the former director of the CDC, he basically ousted her because she said she wasn't willing to just sign off on what this committee recommended for vaccines. And he replaced her with this biotech entrepreneur who did. I think, big picture, the issue here is people, whereas I used to never think twice if somebody had a really basic question about a vaccine or, should you take malaria medicine when you go somewhere, I used to just say, go to the CDC website. They have very clear information. This is what doctors do all the time. Just refer to it. The fear is this is slowly not going to be the case. So the CDC will no longer be that place. And there'll be different places like Infectious Disease Society of America or American Academy of Pediatrics that might post recommendations. But, it's not a place that just everybody in the U.S. can just go to for balanced information.
So I guess I have to ask you with regard to public health, the same thing I've been asking other people with regard to the federal government. I'm in Chicago where they sent troops, right? And, the nice judge told them to go away yesterday. But the kind of question that I want to ask you, so the health-related similar question is, what do Americans do to protect themselves now? How do we organize to get, as you said in the beginning, if there's something goes wrong, you need speed, you need information, how do we get that if the federal government has decided they're not in that business anymore? Or worse, they're in a competing business?
I mean, the issue is, it might depend a lot on where you live. Will the state, I know I talked with health officials at New York City's Department of Health during the last large measles outbreak. The one in West Texas is the biggest we've seen in 30 years. It's even much larger if you include all of the states it's now spread to. But the next biggest one was in 2019 in New York City. And the city put a ton of money into the response. And the leadership at the time, we can debate on, how effective their measures were, but the leadership also was declaring it, an emergency. The same thing happened in Washington State, where you had politicians saying, this is an emergency. We need to do emergency things, including infuse this response with money so that we can hire more people to help out with the response. So it'll depend on where you live. So maybe you live in a place that does that, but maybe you live in a place that either can't do that or isn't doing it for political reasons. And so that's a problem, because diseases don't know borders and, it's not fair to the people in those places.
Wow. So what we're really saying is there is no real alternative to, I mean, this is one of the things the federal government should do. This is about protecting the homeland. It's the scientific version of having an army, right? It's here to protect us, and they are standing down.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I wrote a lot about the bird flu last year, and there's been pretty much no testing of people this entire year. There's been very, very little of it. So I don't know if it's, if farm workers are still being infected by the bird flu. I know that birds are migrating around now, so we'll start seeing more bird flu cases on poultry farms, maybe again on dairy. Will we track it? Will we know if it's infecting people? And with that one, we won't know if it becomes something truly threatening until we see a surge of cases in hospitals. If we're not doing anything to test, we won't know until it's kind of too big to really control.
Yeah. Well, Amy, that's going to be our last word because we've run out of time. I can't thank you enough. And look, KFF is not sort of on normal people's radar screen who aren't deeply into health issues. But the writing that you do is not for scholars. It's for regular people. It's wonderful and accessible. So tell people how they find your work.
Thank you so much. You can go to KFF Health News. There's all sorts of stuff there. I've got my own page on KFF Health News. And I post most of it on Blue Sky, if you've got Blue Sky, with my name, Amy Maxman.
Thank you, Amy. I hope the worst that we expect does not happen, but let's talk again in a few months.
I love that idea. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, Jim, let's go. Kick us off.
Austerity, I can't believe the austerity that the Republican Party wants to visit on the American citizens and abroad. They're cutting funding abroad. They're cutting funding here. You get by. We don't need SNAP benefits anymore. We don't need any health care. That's passé. We can take care of our own health problems ourselves. We get the proper channel on the internet. We become doctors ourselves, apparently. And they've always been toward that way, austerity, but now the interesting thing is now they have people with inexhaustible funds pushed it, which really makes it grotesque. When you've got Musk pushing austerity and you've got the guy that bought Channel 2 pushing austerity and all these people with inexhaustible funds pushing austerity is really unique in American history. But anyway, Edwin, have a great show. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And you know what? Everywhere else, when the World Bank imposes austerity on a country, it's to rein in their budget deficits. But that's not what's going on here. This isn't a typical austerity measure. What's going on here is a wealth transfer from working women and men to the richest people on the planet. It's completely unacceptable, and it has nothing to do with normal austerity measures, and that it does nothing to help with the budget deficit. It just blows an even bigger hole in it. Okay, Roosevelt.
Hey, Double E, how you doing? Thank you for taking my call.
Good.
So, have you seen the way that lady was arrested? A couple of ladies, actually. The one from WGN. Her clothes were almost off of her on her backside. Did you see that video?
I did.
Yeah, and did you see the lady that was face down also at a school, mind you, at a school, saying she was a citizen, she was born here, and they still arrested her? Of course, they let her go, but these are the kind of things that, we've seen our past history happen in other countries. We become them. That's my point. There's another point, too. We're making the mistake of calling these guys agents, federal agents. They're not. What they're doing is against the Constitution.
Well, you're under the confused impression, Roosevelt, that they care.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. That's true. But here's the thing.
They do not care. The president does not care. The Constitution does not matter to him. He wants to coerce this great city into doing whatever it is that, just to cave, to be weak. And we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but it's a shame. Hey, what about the father, the priest, that was hit on the head?
He was shot with a pellet gun, and he was, and then on top of that, he was sprayed.
Yeah, on top of it was sprayed. And the children, that's the thing. That's one of my points that nobody talks about. That our children are seeing this, the impact that it's going to have of them in the long run in their lives, So I try to compare when I was, raised and where they're at the point where they're being raised. They're seeing a horror injustice, and what's the worst is the presidency, itself. What do they think? I think we should ask a lot of questions of our kids. How do they see it? What do they see? Because we as adults tend to ignore the fact that, it's happening, and we see that children are being abused, physically, and zip ties, like that child that was 3 years old over there in 75th and South Shore. But we need to ask our children, how do they see this? How much it's impacting them? What do they think? I'm sure it's not very, how can I say, they're not at ease day in, day out lives, going to school. And that's another point. I'm glad I brought that up myself. Is the next thing that they're going to do go to high schools, grammar schools, and pull out DACA students? That's the next step, I think. I don't know what you think, but
they are. But look, I want to be clear about something. This is go back to what the children are seeing. Some of this is on us adults because there's something else to be seen, and we tend to focus on the horror, on the things that children shouldn't see. The horrible behavior of this president, the Kristi Noem, and the whole security apparatus they are shoving down our throats. That's a terrible model. You're absolutely right. But what else they could see is all of those adults who aren't even their parents who are showing up at school to protect them. They could see all of these people who are out bringing food to houses where people can't, are afraid to go out. The outpouring of goodness and community building in this city is such a beautiful thing and such a lesson for adults as well as children of how to behave well, of common decency and community building and care for each other. And in fact, a demand that says, you know what, and we will be free. And I just think these are things that kids can take too, but we have to have the courage to focus on them and not just on the horror show that's coming from this administration at every turn.
And speaking of that, I'm glad you brought me back to the positive side. I want to share with you a couple of stories in it's Mexican community. This young lady and this young man was delivering groceries free of charge because the people are terrified of coming out and getting picked up, and that's what they do. And it's a team of them. All these are young people. All these they gave me such hope. And one more thing, and there was another young man. He had taken cars that were abandoned. He's got his flatbed truck free of charge. EE. Young man, maybe in his late 20s. And he goes, it's the least I can do for my people. And they gave me such hope. And that's my point. I want to see young people getting involved, and they are. You make a good point, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm just so proud of what I see going on in this city. I'm so proud of, the people who've gone out to protest, the people who've gone to schools to protect the kids, the people you're talking about who've delivered food and, done all of these great things. It's just so the best of America. And like I said at the beginning of the show, Donald Trump, Trumpism, his crowd in D.C., they are a dead end for this country, a dead end. But there's this new beginning happening, as it always does here in America, when our backs are to the wall and we are in this crucible, in this case, a crucible of our own making, a crucible of cruelty coming from the President of the United States. And yet, it's amazing what people are doing. And they're showing us who we can be again. I love that.
Yeah, so do I. So I'm glad you brought that up, and it gives us hope and unity too, because I've seen different races getting together, and I thought I would never see that. So
Yeah, even in Chicago, this most divided city, we're seeing that. Yep.
Thank you, Billy.
You bet. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yep. Naomi, you're next.
Hi, Edwin.
Naomi?
Hi, Edwin. Hi. Listen, I have a suggestion. It's going to take a minute to develop, but before, I'd like to say that we're watching a criminal enterprise in action. It's not our government. And they're sending interlopers into our states and municipalities. They're not ICE agents. They're interlopers. And I was watching this, and I thought last week, wow, they're threatening different jurisdictions at different times, incrementally to come in. And should we wait around for them just to do it to everybody already? So I decided we need to do something preemptively. And I have a two-pronged suggestion. It'll take me a second to develop it for you.
Go ahead.
Okay. The first one is a legal lawsuit. But let me tell you what I mean. It needs to be done properly for the impact, the maximum impact. Every jurisdiction needs to be contacted, every state. If they want to participate, I would encourage all the states to participate. Of course, some of them won't, the red states, but there might be municipalities, blue municipalities or counties or however they structure their states, municipalities who want to participate. So the point is to encourage as many municipalities and or states to participate. And if they won't allow one lawsuit on the same day, one lawsuit to encompass everything, all the municipalities, then they need to all file separately on the same day. And what we're asking for is for an injunction to enjoin the criminal enterprise from entering our municipalities and our states, etc. And then when he appeals it, we're going to they overturn the rulings that we're going to win. We're going to tell the Supreme Court because they're enabling a criminal enterprise, we will not adhere to their ruling. And that's what we need to do. But the fact is we need to invite as many entities in the country to involve themselves in this because that's going to be the punch, That's going to be the effect is going to be the most potent.
Okay.
So in order to do this, we need to contact our governors, our state representatives, assembly people, representatives, senators, states, federal attorneys generals. Okay. Now the second part is this I wanted to do from the beginning when he started acting up at the very beginning, and nobody paid any attention to me. We need to divert the finances back to the states because they're bankrupting us. That's their point. And so we need to have all the states governors and the legislatures we need to pound them. We need to call them. I'm encouraging people to do this, to contact your representatives, your governors, your attorneys general, to file legislation to divert the funds into the states and establish escrow accounts or however. There's a way to handle it. I know. I'm sure it's going to have to be done. But both of those things. So the point is to go after them. not wait for them to come to us and assault us.
Well, Osa, I'm not sure I concur with all the methods you're talking about, but you and my very first guest today share this opinion that we are not powerless, that there are things that we can do, and that we have to step up. And I want to just say, our governor in Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, called on the National Governors Association to join in denouncing the sending of troops from one state to another. And so far, two Republican governors have done that now already. Have said, you know what, we don't think this is a good idea, beginning with one in Oklahoma. So you know what this administration doing is appalling to people in red states as well as blue ones, and we need to remember that and reach out to our fellow citizens in these other states and saying, look, you're hearing a lot of hate on the media you watch. Set it aside, and let's do some good things together.
In other words, what their behavior is uniting us.
Yeah, there's a middle to be had in America, and I don't mean middle soft. I mean there's a large body of agreement among Americans. We see the same things. We know, we're not crazy. We can get together. We can overcome this moment. Hey, thank you, Naomi. I really appreciate it. Where are you calling from?
You're welcome. It's Santa Monica, but I want people to call their representatives, their attorneys general, everybody. And start
everybody
working.
Should call.
Maybe they have some. Yeah, they may develop some other strategies to supersede to prevent them from assaulting us further. Yep.
Thank you, Naomi.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Dave, you're next.
Hey, Edwin. Yeah, I just read a story last night that the National Guard was in Memphis, were patrolling with the police down there, and. Also, Tennessee, did you happen to see that story where that munitions factory exploded up in Bucksnert?
I did. It's a terrible story.
And because they still don't know what caused it yet. But being a red state who's not too much into unions, I'm sure OSHA was overlooked on a few things. So.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know what caused it or if it was intentional. We really don't know anything yet. So I want to wait till we know more. But it's a terrible tragedy. A lot of people were killed.
But I'm just saying that they ain't through union, down that way. They kind of skip rules here and there. But, and I noticed up in my neighborhood here, just as I was pulling into the parking lot here, the helicopters flying around. And the other day, there was about 3 of them flying around in our area, so I don't know. And they showed on the site, the WCPT site, where they had a cop car in front of this house where these ICE guys came in, and it sure looked like one of our cop vehicles. They couldn't quite read the writing on that, but it was one of them 4-wheel drive buggies and that.
People should be patient with the Chicago police right now. They have an incredibly, terribly difficult task, right? They have to protect, they have to allow the federal government to do what it's allowed to do. They have to allow us to protest what we don't like. They have to help us make sure the federal government doesn't do things they are not allowed to do. In other words, they can't be allowed to break the law either. So it's a very, very tough job they've got right now.
What I was speaking about, though, is in the northwest suburbs that they got on the CPT site on this one cop. It was first blocking the driveway, and then when these ICE people come complaining, then he pulled aside. So I couldn't quite read the writing on the door, but it sure looked a lot like the vehicles that our police use. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, Edwin, I'm close with, may not make it to some of these protests, but I've said it before. I put in my vehicle, 3x5 flag upside down. And, if I can't make it to the protest, I go driving to different cities maybe, and then also to different states can also show, that's a sign of distress, so that we're not pleased with the government we got with right now. So.
Yep. Well, thank you as always for being part of this conversation. I appreciate it.
All right, Edwin, be well.
You too. Bye. Bye. All right. We are, let's see. I know, forgive me. I'm trying to look and see who's next here. Donna, you're next. Oh, okay. All right. Well, this is an interesting show today, and I guess I'm going to close with this. The conversation with Roosevelt, I think, is going to stay with me for a long time. You know, I mean, we began by talking about the terrible things we're seeing, the terrible things that the government of the United States is doing to people in, you know, everywhere, but in this city of Chicago in particular. And the images that kids are going to have to live with seeing this and how terrible that is. And yet, as soon as I started to talk about what I see, I walk my dog around, you know, schools in my neighborhood at pickup time at the end of the day, and it turns out there are piles of other adults who are doing the same thing. Just try and be sure that these kids make it home safely. That the thugs don't come and make their lives miserable, right? And I started to tell that story, and what came to Roosevelt's mind was stories he'd heard, right, about people bringing food or delivering groceries for free, about even in a historically, you know, racially divided place, how people are working across ethnic lines to help each other and to build community. And that brings me back to what I said in the beginning. Right? This administration is a moral dead end. It is a society-killing dead end. There is, and I've said this before, there's not a single person in the leadership role of the government of the United States that you can admire. Not one. It is a despicable collection of hacks, crooks, and fascists. Terrible people. And yet, we are not they. Or as a great artist once wrote, we will not become what we mean to you. Right? We are, for them, we are just like the cannon fodder, the base, the people they make money off of, the dupes, the chumps. But that's not us. It's never been us. So, you know what? They put our backs to the wall, and what do they get? They get us being kind to each other. They get us standing up for each other. They get us standing together in larger and larger numbers. They get us saying no kings. And they can whine and cry and say that somehow makes us Marxists. I mean, something ridiculous. It makes us Americans. Americans who are going to stand and fight for each other. And as you heard when we talked to Curtis Hartel in Michigan, what does it mean when Democrats are fighting for each other? Forget the policies. It's measurable in people's lives, right? They can pay for health insurance. They get lifted out of poverty. You know, all of this is hard, and every time we make progress, we are fighting against the interests of organized money in the Republican Party who just want to create an oligarchy, just hoover it all up and take it away. And they're tough, and they have allies in the Supreme Court, and they've taken over, you know, our federal government, but we can take it back. We can. And they're going to come after us, and they're going to come after us, and they're going to come after us, and that's the beautiful thing. Because you know what? We're Americans. We can take tough. And we haven't had to do it in a while. You know, it's an old muscle that most of this country hasn't, thank God, had to use in a long, long time. But we're using it now. People are getting together. They're standing up. They're paying attention. They are bearing witness. And above all, they are saying, you will not take our freedom. No, sir, you will not. And on that note, go to the No Kings March. Be part of it. Raise your voice. And I will talk to you next week. Have a great week.